So welcome to the class. I am able to log in now here at Mary Baldwin, so that was an exciting thing this morning for me. And I just wanted to alert you to the web page that we basically have, the Blackboard site, that the syllabus is up. So if you look under syllabus, you will see that I've actually posted. It's the 5th draft of the syllabus. I think it pretty much follows the other drafts that we've had. I think some of you may have had a suggestion or two about changes, so I've updated that. And then the other important thing are course modules. We have course modules in this class, so if you go under course modules, module 1 is the module we're on right now, and the agenda for today's class, for class number 2, I'll always try to have an agenda, and I brought it in today because I changed it up on my way in, and it's my first week, and so I just bring handouts in. But the idea is you basically bring it up and you have it, and hopefully it'll come up here. So today we're going to actually talk about cognitive neuroscience. Let me give you the lay of the land here. We did a little study last time, correct? We're going to talk about that study towards the end of class today. So with that being stated, with the handout that you have before you, let me put things down. And I'll take my seat so everybody can hear me. If you say something, I may repeat it so the online folks can hear what we're talking about. But if you look at the handout here, we're going to start talking today not so much about the lab, but this is a class in cognitive neuroscience. The place I wanted to actually start here with cognitive psychology and cognitive neuroscience is the mind-body problem. And so if you have a notepad, this is the agenda. You take notes, you write things down. This will be useful for your online test. The mind-body problem. Has anybody heard about what this is about, the mind-body issue or the mind-body problem? Does anybody have any thoughts on how many people have heard of the mind-body issue before? Has anybody heard of it? Just a little bit. Do you any thoughts about it?
Doesn't it kind of have to do with the processes that help with thinking what makes up the mind?
So what makes up the mind is kind of part of it. It's a good thought. Any other thoughts about the mind-body issue? So people have not really heard of the mind-body issue. The mind-body issue is this relationship between mind processes and body processes. Mind processes and body processes. The mind, when you think about the mind, what do you think about? What do you think about when you think about the mind, if it's the mind? What kind of things do you think about? Are you doing anything mindful right now? Are you doing any mental activity? Kate, would you say?
Yeah.
What kind of things are you doing even right now?
Thinking and then also hearing what you're saying and processing it.
Yeah. So mind processes might be things like thinking. You could actually almost call them cognitive things. In cognitive psychology, it's a field of the mind. So cognitive psychology, if you want to write for your notes, problem solving, that's a mental activity. Problem solving, attention, language, and memory. These are all kind of mental things we do, right? You're trying to understand my language, my speech. So problem solving, attention, language, and memory. And I always like to say them in that order because it forms a very simple way of memorizing these fields. Palm of your hand. Yes, that's a mnemonic device. So all these mental things. So mind processes are things we do mentally. So do you think the field of cognitive psychology is about mind things?
Yes.
Yeah, the field of cognitive psychology is very much about mindful type things. What about body? When you think of body, what kind of things kind of come to mind? Sam, any thoughts?
Sometimes bodily sensations, so being hungry or tired, but also how we respond to stress.
So how you respond to stress, how your body responds to stress. Can anybody else add to that? Hannah, any thoughts from you about body? Would you agree with what Sam had to say? Would you add anything to that?
I think the way your body reacts to things, so if you notice, so if you sweat or get the chills, or how you.
So getting the chills, sweating, kind of physiological arousal. So the body are basically considered things going on physiologically with neurons and all this kind of stuff. So the mind-body, as it would be, is kind of the understanding of the relationship between mind processes, mental processes, cognitive things, and body processes. So when you think of the title of this class, what is this class called, Madison?
Cognitive neuroscience.
Cognitive neuroscience. Are there some... So cognitive is mind. What would you say neuroscience would be?
It's how your brain processes these body functions.
So it's more on the body level. So the field of cognitive neuroscience, for your notes, is actually a mind-body field. And do people in cognitive neuroscience think there's probably a link between the two? They probably would. They probably would say that. So what I wanted to do first, so you understand now the fields of cognitive psychology, problem solving, attention, language, and memory. You know what the mind-body problem is, and that's a good thing. I'm going to give you a little history that's going to kind of tie into the history of cognitive psychology and the mind-body problem, and then we're going to move into kind of the cognitive neuroscience realm, because history of this field is kind of an important thing. So with that being said, if you go to A here, you understand the mind-body problem. There was a person a long time ago, I think in the 16 or 1700s, Descartes. Have you heard of Descartes? Do we know when Descartes was around?
Mid-1600s, I'm pretty sure.
Okay, we'll go with mid-1600s. That works for me. Descartes basically said, mind and body are not related. He basically said you got the mind processes, if you want to write this for your notes, you got the mind processes, and they're completely separate from the body processes. So if you're in the field of, was there a field of psychology at that point, do you think, Kate? 1600s, do you think there was psychology?
They probably didn't call it psychology.
They probably didn't call it.
Had the same, question.
The same question. So there was probably a little bit of psychology. People in the mind field, psychologists, religion, people who were healers, philosophers, they were all kind of put in the mind field. So if you were a philosopher, if you're a religious person, if you were interested in psychological issues, you guys study the mind. You're over here. People studying the body would be whom?
Behaviors.
Say again? The behaviors. And what kind of behaviors? So in the 1600s, you'd be studying behaviors. How about medical doctors? What would medical doctors? There were doctors in the 1600s. What kind of things would they be looking at? Lily, I see you munching on something right now. What would medical doctors study?
I guess the way that people physically react to things, their viruses, they weren't really that connected to the two.
Viruses, and I was even thinking eating behavior and drinking behavior. So doctors were given the realm, very importantly, you guys study the body. We got the body thing over here, how things work, and it was very different back then, and how the body worked. They didn't have modern science, but the basic idea was the mind people, you guys are over here, psychology, religion, philosophers, doctors, you guys study the body. And they're completely separate. So this position was called, according to your outline, what? Dualism. Mind and body are completely separate, and there is absolutely no relationship between the two. Descartes basically came up with this idea, and he said, you doctors and medical people, you're over here, you psychology people and Religion and philosophers, you're over there. Any comments or questions about that? Does that make sense? Yeah,
Now,
please.
how did that work with separating religion into the mind and medical doctors into the body? Because didn't they kind of think like, oh, if this is happening to you, oh, there's an evil spirit. How did that all tie in?
And so that idea, when they saw this kind of crazy behavior, it's a good question. When you saw crazy behavior, you were possessed by the devil. So that was mental disorders at that point. It's a wonderful question and a good thing to write down. Mental disorders in the 1700s, you were possessed by demons. It was actually a mind state. It was a religion thing. There was really no connection whatsoever to the body. So, good question, good thought. Does that make sense to people? And there was nothing scientific about it at all. And so, one position you could take is dualism, that they're completely separate. What do you think the cognitive neuroscience thinks about that? Brittany, can I ask you, if you're in cognitive neuroscience, do you think mind and body are completely separate and dualistic? What would you believe?
That they're not separate.
That they're not separate. There is a relationship between mind and body. How many people believe in this class that there is a relationship between mind and body? Yes, most people now, but this was in the 1600s. Somebody's having a stress reaction as we speak. There's a fire truck going outside to handle an emergency. There's a mind-body connection. Most people believe that, but back in the 1600s, that wasn't really part of the equation. So most people believe there is a relationship, and if you believe there is a relationship, that position is called monism. And there are basically, and you want to take some notes on this, two types of positions you can have with monism. The two types of positions, one is that mind and body are perfectly related. You can take any mind state. Do you remember what the mind states are? Be a coghead. What are the mind states?
Problem solving, attention, language, and memory.
So you could take any one of those things, maybe we can deal with memory, and you can reduce it. Very important term, reductionism. You could reduce it to a body state. There's a one-to-one relationship between mind and body. Go ahead, question.
What were the mind states?
The mind states are the cognitive psychology fields of problem solving, attention, language, and memory, we can say in this class. So you could take any mental state and reduce it in a one-to-one way to like neurobiology, to physiology. And that is considered the position of type reductionism. In type reductionism, you believe any mental state could be reduced exactly in a linear way to any physiological state. Now let me give you maybe a simple example of this, if I could. Back in the 1970s, if you want to write this study down, back in the 1970s, there was a study done with monkeys. And for those that are on the online class, do we have some pictures of monkeys here in the face-to-face class?
Yeah.
Yes, we have a poster of primates right under the periodic table, posted there for the body states. So we have the situation with mind and body going on here and the physiology of things. So they actually identified that when they put recording electrodes into the brain of monkeys, when they put recording electrodes into the brain, they were able to show various faces to these monkeys. And they found that different neurons fired for different faces. They found that different neurons fired for different faces. So there seemed to be one neuron that seemed to fire for different faces. And these were given the name, they were called kind of grandmother cells. So you could recognize different faces. There was a neuron for each face. Do you think that would be considered evidence of type reductionism? Emma, why would you say yes to that?
Because it's breaking down, like they're seeing a face, like, mentally, like that's, a mental
That's a mental
process
thing,
that they're
recognizing a
that
face.
they're breaking down to a neurobiological process at its core.
You got one neuron for one face. That was a good example, these grandmother cells, for your notes, of type reductionism. There is a relationship, and you can take, God bless you, kind of one-to-one type reductionism from a mind to a body state in a one-to-one way. Now, how many people in the class believe that that's really the way, that you can take any mental state and get exactly to a body state? Do people believe that? Let me bring up maybe another example for you. What's the most common mental disability that people know about? Mental illness, what's one of the common mental illnesses that we know about in psychology? Depression, anxiety. Let's take depression as an example. So let's use depression as an example here. So a disease like depression. Do a lot of people have depression? Yes, it's a very common disease to have. Now, is there a link in depression mentally? Do we know what the mental status, if you're depressed, what is the mental part of that? When you're depressed, how do you feel? What are some of the mental things that you feel when you're depressed?
Unfocused, lethargic, sad.
Yeah, kind of tired, lethargic, feelings of worthlessness, hopelessness. So you have the mental feelings of worrying and being sad, changes in eating and drinking, but kind of feelings of loneliness and sadness, we might say. So we have a mental state there, if you want to write that for your notes, a mental state of depression, feeling worthless, hopeless, very sad. Now, are there medicines to help treat depression?
Yes.
Yeah, there are. What's kind of the most common types of medicines used to treat depression?
SSRIs.
There you go. SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. Was that too much for people? SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. Won't go into a lot of detail there. But these are drugs that increase what neurotransmitter? Serotonin. So the idea is, okay, if you're depressed and you take one of these products, do you guys know what those products are? They're kind of three common ones. Prozac, Paxil, and Zoloft. Have people heard of those? Prozac, Paxil, and Zoloft. The idea is if you take one of these, so we kind of got a mind and we know low levels of serotonin are linked to this, does it necessarily just fix depression? Bella, what do you think?
I don't think it does, because a lot of the time a big help in having depression is going to therapy.
So a big help would be going to therapy as well. We're all in the field of psychology. So this position, the position of, yes, depression seems to be linked to low levels of serotonin. There is a connection there, but it's not a one-to-one situation. You would call this token reductionism. In token reductionism, we believe there is a link between mind states and body states, but it's not a one-to-one thing. Depressed, oh, low levels of serotonin here, fix serotonin and you're not depressed anymore. We don't necessarily believe that. Does that make sense for people? So, for the history, we've got this mind-body problem. Dualism, you believe what?
They're separate.
That they're completely separate. And in cognitive neuroscience, do we believe this is the way? No, the field of cognitive neuroscience kind of contradicts that, because cognitive and neuroscience, we think there's a link. Then monism, If you believe there's just a one-to-one relationship between any mental state and any physiological state, what would that be called? Type reductionism. If you believe there is a relationship but it's not one-to-one, what is that called? Token reductionism. What position do most people probably take about this issue? Yeah, token. There is a relationship, we're well beyond Descartes, but maybe not a one-to-one based situation. Does that make sense to people? Okay, let me stop the recording here for just a minute.